Hello and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And tonight we are going to be doing something a little bit different to our norm. We are going to be covering off a little bit about morality. So morality is one of those topics that you actually hear a lot about on the internet. Lots of people with lots of different opinions, etc. And over the past year or so, I've been compiling together these quick reference cards. I've done a thread on Twitter, sort of getting some people to look at them and give feedback, and I've tweaked them. And tonight we figured what we'd do is we'd run through these cards and basically just see what, might need changing, any objections or anything like that, really. We were going to have a couple of guests, but due to a couple of last-minute emergencies, they are not available to come tonight. However, we think this stream might actually end up a two-parter, so hopefully they can join us for the next one. And also, if there are any comments or anything like that we happen to miss, we will do a feedback stream based off of the back of this as well. So let me blow this up.
Vandal.
Obviously, anyone who's got any comments or anything like that, please feel free to share them. I will get to them as soon as we can. We'll try and cover off sort of each slide and have a bit of a discussion about them. But yeah, this is just basically to cover off the basics of morality. Now, I don't know if you've read any of the articles on Answers in Reason, but we will be leaning a bit on them tonight. But let's get on with it, shall we? Welcome. So having covered off,
that took a while.
Having covered off a number of different moral theories and takes on morality in Season 2 of Fresh Air, as well as discussing its purpose and how morality is far more complex than the simple subjective versus objective debate, I've created these cards for a simple quick reference. So for a tester, I thought it would be great to cover in this video and see if we get any questions or critique to help polish the final product. The final product will be something that we will put up on various social media outlets, on the site and everything like that, so people can have as a quick reference to various things that are discussed when you're talking about morality, and basically just what they actually mean, because there are a lot of things when you're discussing morality that people seem to have a different idea to sort of what the textbook's probably the wrong word, but the normative definitions of certain phrases, etc. So the first thing we have to ask is, what is morality? And it's simply principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong or good and bad behavior. There's various systems of morality and moral theories, which we're not actually going to go deep into tonight. This is more a ground level. However, if people are interested in this topic, we'll happily go into more detail on it. We have covered this off in the Fresh Air streams as well, going through a number of different moral theories. But in general, I don't think that they're necessary for tonight's discussion. But as always, if you've got any questions or you want to bring anything up, then please feel free to. So what's a moral? Basically, a moral is a judgment on actions and behaviors. For example, we deem it a particular behavior to be moral, which is good, immoral, which is bad, and amoral, which is neither good or bad. A system of morality would have a selection of morals, or a theory that these morals would be based on to allow us to decide if an action is good or bad. So what is the origin of morality? So morality seemed to evolve as we did, just as our understanding of morality evolves as we do and learn new things. Empathy plays a big role in morality, but it's not the only thing that defines it. This is one of the common things that we actually hear, isn't it, Dave? That all you need for morality is empathy.
Yeah. And there's even arguments that empathy.
Oh, I think we lost you there, Dave.
Because it's biased. Can you
Sorry.
hear me?
Yeah, no, you're back now. Say again.
Okay. Yeah, empathy. We do hear a lot of atheists say that. And in philosophy, there's arguments that empathy shouldn't play a part in morality because empathy is biased and morality should be as unbiased as possible.
I suppose that is correct, especially if you are trying to be as objective as possible of what is right and wrong. You don't necessarily want things like that. You're going to have more empathy towards people that are closer to you, aren't you?
Yeah, and there's those who argue that it's part of our psychology, so it has to play a part because it's part of who we are, and we can't really eradicate it from us. And with the old ought involves can, if we cannot disregard that part of our psychology, then we not ought to take morality out. It's quite an interesting discussion that goes on about that.
I think that'd be a good one for us to get into to depth on, actually. I mean, maybe we should put that one in for a couple of weeks' time. I know I've been speaking to my friend Ben, who's a psychotherapist, and it might be interesting to get a slightly different take on morality from his perspective as well.
Yeah.
So, what is morality's purpose? The principles of good and bad, right and wrong behaviour go back to our survival. All species are driven to survive at a genetic level. We can break survival down into three aspects: well-being, sustainability, and cooperation. Cooperation is one of the cornerstones of survival, especially for a social species like us. A species that works together has a higher chance of survival than one that lives a solitary lifestyle. Cooperation creates a cohesive and productive society, which in turn increases our chance of survival. Well-being can be split into four aspects: physical, mental, emotional, and material, which includes financial. Physical well-being relates to physical harm and suffering. Mental well-being relates to the cognitive state. Emotional well-being relates to one's emotional state. Happy people are more productive and cooperative. And material well-being is any of our possessions or financials. Physical well-being relates to physical harm and suffering. No species likes getting hurt except for a few kinks that people may have. Pain is usually avoided at all costs, except for the aforementioned. Extreme pain, for example, losing limbs, can make it harder to survive and fulfill other aspects of survival. The same can be said with certain diseases as well. Mental well-being relates to the cognitive state, from, having a positive outlook and to your level of sanity. A negative state can cause negative actions that have some serious negative consequences, both to the self and to others. A positive mental state makes one more productive, kind, and cooperative. Emotional well-being relates to one's emotional state. Funny that. Happy people are more productive and cooperative in general. This, in turn, enables a more cohesive community. And material well-being is any of our possessions or financials. Having these taken from us, without permission, obviously, can negatively impact our emotional well-being. Our possessions can also increase our chance of survival. So whether it's a weapon or a place to stay or the money to get those things, for example. So ultimately, the purpose of morality seems to be far more than simply survival. Through examination of various moral theories and looking at the writings of various moral philosophers, there is a consistent view with most, not all, that flourishing is the ultimate purpose of morality. That is to say, not just to survive, but to live well and do well. Aristotle referred to this as eudaimonia. That's not pneumonia. Don't get the two confused. You don't want pneumonia. There is also some debate from people as well as to whether this applies to humans or all sentient life. This isn't necessarily the topic for today, but it's an argument as whether morality just applies to our species or if we should be looking after various animals who are also sentient, if they have certain cognitive abilities, etc. So first we're going to address subjective morality. So when we speak of subjective, we mean something that is based on personal opinion. So what we're talking about here is if morality is wholly subjective, not just aspects of it. So while someone can build a moral based purely on opinion, it doesn't necessarily have any bearing on the real world. There's no way to decipher whom is right or wrong. If morality is wholly subjective, and a rapist thinks it's moral to rape, and someone else thinks it's immoral to rape, both are right because it's down to their personal opinion, which leaves you with a bit of contradiction. So what you need to ask yourself is it moral for the rapist to rape, or do you hold them to a standard above their personal opinion? Do you turn round and tell that rapist, no, it's wrong to rape? It's not until we examine this objectively we can truly consider things like the harm this causes. Many folks claim morality is subjective because they use a faulty definition or because they are just being contrary to religious folks whom say morality is objective. And many religious folks say it's objective, meaning absolute. So there is a bit of conflation going on there. But what we're actually talking about with this, about morality being wholly subjective, is that there is no real truth value. So there is no real right or wrong. There's just opinions of what is right or wrong. But the second you are telling someone else that they are wrong, you are treating morality objectively, even if you've built that completely subjective yourself.
Yeah. There's a couple of ways to put this. When we speak of morality, you can speak of subjective morality as having a truth value. And that truth value comes from the person's opinion. The truth value is determined solely by the person's opinion about whether or not it's moral or immoral. Another form of subjective morality would be considered emotivism. One is a kind of moral realism. The moral subjectivism would be kind of a moral realism where you say that moral statements are statements about the way things are. they're propositions. They hold truth values, and they get the truth value from the person's opinion. That's generally what people are talking about, especially religious people. They're talking about, when they talk about subjective morality, they're talking about it still having truth value. And emotivism is more mainly.
Oh, we've lost you again there, Dave. I don't know what's going on tonight.
Something they don't necessarily.
Yeah. Dave, we lost you there again. I don't know if it's my end or yours. But yeah, I don't know if you got anything downloading. But you
No,
got up to emotivism, is where you left that one.
Which part of emotivism?
At the beginning.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So subjective morality can be sort of judged in a couple of ways. You have emotivism, which is the idea that morals are simply emotional responses to certain actions or circumstances. So it's merely an expression of a preference kind of thing. And the other type, ethical subjectivism, moral subjectivism, is where moral statements are propositions. They describe a truth about the world that you think, and the truth of it comes from your opinion. So this is basically what religious people, like the William Lane Craig, without God, there's no objective morals. Hey, Lord Bryant.
How you doing?
Yeah, that's generally what they're talking about. They're not talking about emotivism. They're talking about moral subjectivism, where your personal preference, your idea gives it truth. But again, it's like you say, there are two contradictions. And if you're arguing that the truth comes from whatever the person says it is, well, then you have two truths. Which one is correct? Do you simply accept that the other one is correct and you say, well, that's your way, it's not my way? Or do you say, well, no, you're wrong about it being right, that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, I definitely. And I mean, you could even land yourself in a situation where, as we were talking about with the contrary statements, where, for example, if we were talking about the preferences side of things, a toddler wouldn't want to be tortured, but someone might think torturing a toddler is moral, and then what do you do there? Which one of them is right? If it's just down to preference, then they're both right, which again you're back into that sort of contrary truth values. So yeah, what I meant by there is no truth value, it was more the truth value is just down to your preference. I'm sorry if that was unclear when I said it.
Just thought I'd clarify for people.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did. Thank you very much. And yes, it's great to have you here. If you've got any comments, throw them in. Lord Bryant, someone I've been chatting to on Twitter recently. It's always good to have someone else join in. And anything that you've got to say, I mean, we don't what's the word? Censor. I'd almost forgotten that. But yes, so any comments or anything like that, we'll address it. But I think that basically covers off the subjective a little bit. So let's move on. So subjective, some people say it means from the mind. Whilst from the mind or similar is one of the valid definitions of subjective, when we speak of morality, it does not work. Morality is a concept, so of course it arose from our mind. And that's just simply to put that one off. So relative morality. So relative is sort of a comparative look between different sets of morals. Essentially, it's looking at how morals work in different societies or comparing different moral theories. Many folks think that because there are different objective standards, or that because societies have different standards of morality, this makes morality relative, also known as moral relativism. And some go one further to say that because it's relative, the choice becomes subjective. This, however, is more taking a descriptive look at morality rather than a normative approach. So consider how you might be judging these morals. Is it purely your opinion, or are you comparing them to facts? Does a society thinking killing homosexuals and atheists a moral act make it moral? Right? There are societies out there that think these things are perfectly okay. Now, if moral relativism is true, then that, what the society has decided is moral, is moral. The truth value moves from it coming from a personal opinion to a societal opinion. If that's all morality is, then essentially you can't say to that society, oh, you're wrong for doing X. That means that when they do kill atheists and they do kill homosexuals, etc., that is a moral act. So question, is it moral? If your answer's no, then it's not relative or subjective. Objective morality. So what we mean by objective when discussing morality is above personal opinion and or based on facts.
Yeah, the simple...
Oh, we've lost you again there, Dave. I don't know what's going on tonight. I hope that it's not going out to the stream as well that this is happening. But I'm just going to try and keep things going. But I will just say objective does not mean correct, absolute, or from God. Dave, I think you're back.
Okay. With the objective thing, what I was saying was that the easiest way to put this is the proposition for the moral statement is a proposition, and it gets its truth value not from the personal opinion, but from whatever system it's being judged by. That's generally what's spoken about with objective morality.
So, in reference to the way a moral could be built, it would mean that potentially it was based on facts, or as Dave said, it could be, if it's in a particular system of morality, it's using statements that does this represent this particular moral theory. So, for example, violations on personhood, bodily autonomy, for example. There could be an impact on a person, like physical harm, unpleasurable pain, emotional and psychological issues. And we can see the negative impact this has and has had on the person's life, their family, and their friends. In nearly all cases of this sort of thing happening, we see similar results. By the overall negative impact, we can determine this immoral. In regards to systems of morality, they are all objective because they are above your personal opinion. A simple example of something objective is law. So whilst laws are not morals, they are a system in each country above your personal opinion. Now, they might be intersubjectively agreed, but simply going, well, I don't agree with that law, so I'm going to ignore it, will not get you out of jail if you happen to cross the line and get caught. So the same can be said for a system of morality. Even if all morals that went into that system were subjective, and the systems and theories would still be objective as they are above your personal opinion. When we speak of morality in this way, we're taking what is known as a normative approach. So Lord Bryant says, I wonder in theory, could both exist? I've asked before in the past to someone else, but they told me you cannot have it both. But I really wonder in theory, could you? So the answer there, if we're talking about subjective, relative, and objective, can you have all of them? Yes. It's as simple as that. morality is far more complex than it being completely subjective or completely objective. That is basically what we are getting to through all of this. There are a number of different ways to look at morality, and part of that's going to be what we're going to talk about when we talk about speaking descriptively and normatively as well.
I'm sorry, I lost my internet for a second there.
Oh, blimey, what's going on? It's typical, isn't it, Dave? It's because I'm doing the video tonight rather than listening to you. You're just like, oh, fuck.
No, I don't know what's up. I mean, you keep freezing and coming in, and so I don't know if it's something my end, but hopefully whatever just happened with the router has solved it.
Okay, well, let's hope so. So another way to think about an objective system of morality is thinking about scientific theory. So we'll use evolution in this example. So we know that evolution is a fact. We know it happens. There are even recent examples of it happening, from small changes to much bigger ones. The theory of evolution explains the process. Your opinion does not change the process or the fact of evolution. Over time, new evidence is found and the theory has been modified. It's not opinions that have changed the theory, it's the evidence. The theory is above opinion. The only thing that will change it is people reviewing the evidence and going, oh, we need to tweak it here. And the same can be said for morals. So now we need to discuss harm. For example, psychological, emotional, or physical forms of harm. So some people might ask, isn't the harm people experience subjective? If the harm is subjective, isn't any morality based on harm subjective? So whilst harm is and can be experienced subjectively, we can observe harm in a number of different ways. For example, through an MRI, hormone levels, people's reactions. We can see it visually. The negative impact on family members and the subject. The negative impact on the subject's life. So another way to objectively measure something like harm is you could gather people in a room or do a survey asking people if they enjoy pain, depression, etc. And with a few kinks aside, you'll generally find an overwhelming majority will say no. And there you technically have an objective scale. Then there's the correct objective standard. So a standard of moral truths that are built on facts, are above personal opinion, and are correct. Now, this can sometimes be hard to know if it is indeed correct, because we don't know if we have all the information about a particular topic. A correct objective standard can and should change with new evidence. Admittedly, that does mean that it wasn't correct before. Many are as correct as they can be with the knowledge and evidence that we have. We consider the scientific method, falsification, or the theory of knowledge known as fallibilism. Something can be considered true until it is known not to be. If a moral is not correct, though, that doesn't suddenly make it subjective. So then we got absolute morals and morality. So absolute is often synonymous with universal. There is a slight difference between the two, but for the sake of the conversation, we'll go with it. So it's a principle which is regarded as universally valid or which may be viewed without relation to other things. An absolute moral is essentially a final point. It applies to everyone and everything in every situation. There's no wiggle room, essentially. It does mean it should be correct, and it means it will never change. It doesn't allow for any nuance. So a way to compare a correct objective standard and an absolute standard is that whilst both are supposed to be correct, the objective standard will allow for nuance. The correct objective standard may not be true for everyone at all times in all places. For example, killing is wrong could be considered objectively true, but the standard may allow for it to happen in self-defense. Absolute standards are far more rigid. Killing is wrong means it is wrong in any circumstances. So in a situation where it is kill or be killed, technically the moral thing would be to die. So if we compare this using language to the real world, we have the word cool. An objective standard would say this is defined as a moderately cold temperature, a look or particular attitude, a positive response to a statement like, no? Whereas the absolute standard would just be, it's only a moderately cold temperature. And just for fun, a subjective standard, the word cool could mean anything, even if no one else understood it, because they would be right, because it's subjective and based on personal opinion. Now, we could argue that this may not be the best example because language is very descriptive with its definitions. Technically, any word can mean anything, and it's one of those things that gains traction, particular uses of words. We've covered this a lot, but for example, the normative definition of atheist versus the descriptive version. They're technically both objective definitions, and if we were to have a subjective definition of atheist right now, atheist means glass of wine. But with the way language works, technically, there's nothing wrong with me saying that. It's ridiculous.
I'm going to drop out for 1 second and come back in because it keeps freezing for me and losing about 10 seconds of the conversation. I'll just be 1 second.
Okie dokie, dude. I will take this time to catch up on the chat because I do apologise. Not been intentionally ignoring you. But let's have a look. Oh. So, how's everyone doing? Oh, OP, you're there. Dude, how you doing? Did you have a good Thanksgiving, etc.? Lord Brian, yes, you were right. So, yeah, back to what you were saying on that. We will come to the difference between the descriptive and normative approach to morality, and that will add a little bit more detail on that variance. And your comment, so you would say that since as long as human history, objective and subjective have both been our foundation, with the facts we have today and the culture constantly changing. Yeah, I mean that is a way you're looking at it. So when you are having a look at different cultures, you're talking about how it works in practice. So this would be speaking descriptively. So I will come on to that. Dave, you're back. Excellent. So yeah.
Hopefully that should have fixed whatever it was.
I hope so too. So on we go. So normative. Oh look, it was the next slide. I should really have remembered what the order was, but man, I've gone back over and over these so many times I do forget. Culture constantly changing. Does that imply subjective? No, not exactly. That would be a relative look. So you're talking about how it changes at different times. Nice to see you too, Josh. I also hope you had a good Thanksgiving. I hope your nut roast or whatever you had was any bit as tasty as everyone else's turkeys.
That just sounds like porn.
Actually, I'm quite interested in making a nut roast from scratch. I think it'd be quite interesting to also get it to taste really nice. Plus, I mean, turkey, the only reason people eat it is because it's big. It's a shit bird, really. Give me like a bunch of chickens. Anyway, Normative. So a process of normalization, essentially standardizing something. So what it means when you're speaking of things is the way things ought to work, the way things ought to be used. So morality, when we speak of the normative morality, it's the way it ought to work rather than comparing how things might work in different societies. To put it another way, normative morality refers to a code of conduct that, given specified conditions, would be put forward by all rational persons. So they've got all the same information about it, and they would say, yep, this is what should be done. And when we're speaking of logic, it's how we ought to answer propositions, for example, using formal logic, providing an epistemological answer rather than simply describing a psychological state. So when we say something descriptively, you are describing a process in how it might works in practice. It might not necessarily follow the rules of logic, or be using a standard definition, like I was talking about with language being descriptive earlier. So, speaking of morality descriptively, it's talking about the way it works in practice, how people apply in their society, usually through either personal or cultural values. So, when you're speaking of morality descriptively, you are saying, yeah, well, this society says that, and that society says that, so therefore it's relative. You're just talking about how it works in practice, not necessarily how morality ought to work. So, to put it another way, descriptive morality refers to certain codes of conduct put forward by a society or a group, such as a religion, or accepted by an individual for his or her own behaviour. When we speak about someone that might answer a proposition descriptively, they are going to be giving us an answer purely on their psychological state rather than giving us an epistemological answer. So Josh says relative versus subjective still confuses you. So the main difference between the two there is subjective is personal opinion, relative is the society's opinion. That is the key difference. So whilst there's no ultimate truth value, the truth value is either found within the person, subjective, or within the culture/society, and that's relative. But what you're saying with both subjective and relative morality is that truth value is there. So if I decided it was moral to punch you in the face, regardless of what you thought of that, it would be moral for me to do so because the truth value comes from me. And if society decided that it was moral for you to kill homosexuals, then that would be the truth value. So in both instances, you can't say, no, I disagree with that. I mean, you can say that, but that's not where the truth value comes from. So it's irrelevant. So descriptive versus normative morality. Descriptively, arguments can be made for subjective, relative, and objective morals and morality. However, you might notice most of these arguments will also be judged objectively. These arguments and statements often don't tell us what is right or wrong, just what people, or the society, believe are right or wrong. Normatively, morality is objective, so these statements provide answers for what is right and wrong, regardless of what people believe. So, do you understand the key difference between those two? So, going back to the chat, as Dave says, relative versus subjective is determined where the proposition gets its truth value. Yeah, so personal opinion is subjective, cultural values is relativism. Sorry, trying to keep in contact with both the chat and you and that. I'm glad you got your right.
But every time I get a pause in the Discord, I go to the chat and just answer any questions as quick as possible.
Yeah, nice one. Feel free to answer them on here as well.
Yeah, I don't like to disturb you
or
interrupt you.
Well, when you see this bit down at the bottom pop up, the fresh air symbol, that means I'm going to shut up and look and see if you're going to say anything. So you can always jump in there.
Okay.
So there are types of moral theories. So all have merit and maybe should be used in conjunction with each other when you're judging something. There are consequentialist moral theories. So that's based on the consequences of actions. So, for example, lying might not always be wrong, but it would be if it caused someone harm. Deontological is more duty-based or rule-based, so it's adherence to rules and duties. So the Hippocratic Oath is an example of something deontological. And then you've got virtue ethics. So they're morals based on virtues: prudence, courage, justice, temperance, etc. We recently did a video on virtue ethics ourselves, didn't we, Dave?
We did.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, around the time of my dissertation.
Yeah, and what was your dissertation on?
Evolution? Or it might have been virtue ethics. I can't remember. It was so long ago now.
So I did mention that we're not going to go too deep into these today. We're not going to. If anyone wants us to go under the skin a bit more, please let us know. There is also the Fresh Air podcast, which we have gone into, like types of consequentialism and deontology, etc. So now we're on to common misconceptions. But before we do that, there's just... so Josh says, just because we've come across new information and find the morality of an action may have changed doesn't mean it's still objective. Objective morality can change. Yeah, that's exactly right. So with new evidence, you can go, oh, actually, I wasn't wrong. I've got to update this to reflect the new evidence that have been provided. Yeah. So actually, that's going to be probably one of the common misconceptions that comes up in a sec. So there are a number of common arguments and misconceptions about morality. Many of these are due to either poor definitions or conflation between descriptive and normative. That's quite a common thing that happens, that people jump back and forth between the two, and it's hard to have a grounded conversation. So hopefully the next section will answer a few of these. So different societies have different moral values. Therefore, morality is subjective. It's relative, not subjective. You're making a descriptive statement, not necessarily a normative statement. It doesn't tell us what is actually right or wrong, just what people or that society believe is right or wrong. Simply put, does a society saying it is moral to rape make rape moral in that society? If your answer is yes, then obviously you think moral relativism is true. If you think rape is wrong, regardless of what people say, then you don't agree with moral subjectivism or moral relativism. So ask yourself why or why not you think things. Subjective means from the mind / from a subject, and morality is a concept. Concepts come from the mind, therefore morality is subjective. So whilst this is a definition of subjective, like I mentioned earlier, it's not the definition of subjective used when discussing morality. Objective in the context of morality does not mean comes from outside of the mind. It means based on facts and or above personal opinion. An objective moral is built by considering the available facts and evidence without personal opinion. The facts are the facts, regardless of what your opinion is. For example, has abuse ever been shown to have a positive effect? What are the usual effects of abuse? Does this represent the purpose of morality, which is flourishing? The same action can be considered moral in one context and immoral in another, so therefore morality is subjective and contextual. So what you're looking at here is known as a nuance. Morals are far more deep than stating a single action is right or wrong, but nuance doesn't instantly make it subjective. So if we take a look at a single action, killing. Now, killing is never a moral action in itself, but you consider in some circumstances it to be the lesser of two evils. The situation, you could argue, is initially subjective, but the standard you hold it to would be done objectively. For example, what were the reasons of killing? If you hadn't killed that person, what would have happened? Was it self-defense? Was it kill or be killed? Did you save anyone in the process? So morality changes over time. Things like slavery were considered moral in the past and immoral now. So morality is subjective or relative. An objective moral does not have to be correct, just above opinion and or based on facts. As such, morals can be self-correcting in the sense that as new evidence comes to light and our understanding of certain topics changes, we then change that moral. So our understanding, again, does not make it subjective. If I had 3 pieces of evidence that indicated men should rule over women, but then later discovered 4 new pieces of evidence that contradicted them and showed that actually there should be equality in the sexes, you could argue that I made both distinctions objectively, and I just corrected my standard when the new evidence came to light. Again, consider a scientific theory. As new evidence comes to light, we might modify our understanding and change that theory. It doesn't mean that theory was wrong, and whilst it could be wrong, it was likely just incomplete. Theory changing doesn't make it subjective. It was still based on evidence. It was still above personal opinion. We just did not have all of the evidence. Morality is not an intrinsic or inherent property of the universe, and is created by subjectives. So therefore, morality is subjective. It doesn't matter who it was created by, just how it was created. It's not the destination, it's the journey. Objective means based on facts or above personal opinion. So it sounds like you're arguing against universal morality rather than objective morality. So even if you think the purpose of morality being flourishing is completely subjective, you can still make objective statements about what best represents it, thus showing it not wholly subjective. So there's a couple of examples I was thinking about, and one of them actually is, say if we were to think of like a hammer. Someone might have created that with a purely subjective intention. I think this might work. This might be the best way to bang in nails. Yet, over time, it has become the objective standard for nails. In fact, there's different objective standards of hammer for different circumstances. So, I think that is one way you can show that something may have been created subjectively, but it then has that objective purpose. You could then also think about another thing. If someone has to drive to Wales, right? There are a number of different ways to get to Wales, but you want to do it in the fastest time possible. There are objective ways to get to your destination as fast as possible. There are objective means where if you don't want to get wet, you make sure that you've got a car so that you've got a roof, or something like that, you know. But if you want to get as much exercise as possible, then you're riding a bike. Again, there's subjectivity in there, but there are objective statements. Thus showing these things, these are not completely one way or the other. Morality is an emotional response to things that either please us or offend us, so therefore morality is subjective. Rape is pleasing to a rapist. Rape is not pleasing to a non-rapist. If morality was subjective, then rape would be okay for the rapist to perform, but not okay for the non-rapist to perform. Is rape okay for anyone to perform? Do you hold a rapist to a standard above their personal opinion? What makes us have an emotional response? Does simply being offended make something immoral? Some people are offended by homosexuality, yet over the years, we've come to realise that love between two consenting adults is just love. There is nothing wrong with it. In fact, homophobia and other forms of bigotry have been realised as immoral. What about people who are pleased by things they know are wrong? Do we not act in ways that don't please us, but do them because they are the right thing to do? So, whilst there may be an objective standard, you are deciding if that action is moral or immoral. Therefore, even if a moral is built on an objective framework, morality is subjective. Whilst I do understand that this is an area that could lean on an area of subjectivity, this too is approached subjectively. Consider abuse. Let's use child abuse in this example. Has it ever been shown to have a positive effect? What do all the studies about child abuse say? Deciding something that is shown to have a negative impact as immoral does not make it subjective. Simply look up the synonyms of moral, bad, vile, depraved, wrongful, etc., and consider if child abuse fits this definition. This isn't just an opinion. You are comparing a behaviour to a definition. Again, your decision is objective. Remember, we're relating all of this back to the purpose of morality, which is flourishing, and can create objective statements about that. Even if you view that purpose as subjective, it still shows that morality is far more complicated than a simple subjective versus objective. And I think that's one of the things that is really difficult, isn't it, Dave? You find so many of the conversations...
I'm sorry, you've been blank for about 30 seconds and I haven't heard a word you said.
Ah, really?
I've been looking at the stream and it's been carrying on, but I haven't heard you in Discord.
Okay. Well, I do apologise with whatever's going on there, Dave. But what I was just saying is that that's one of the common misconceptions that we have with it, is that people argue for it to be wholly subjective or wholly objective. And unfortunately, both suffer issues. So even if someone did view the purpose of morality to be subjective, it still shows that we can make objective statements about morality, and therefore it's more complex than a simple subjective versus objective.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So back we go. Knowledge and evidence comes from and is processed by our minds, so nothing is truly objective. Even if you were to provide something that fits the definition of an objective standard, you are subjectively making a distinction on if the scale is right or wrong. So objective morals do not have to be correct. This is a misunderstanding of objective. If you are using that knowledge and evidence to present a well-formed moral standard rather than it being something more subjective like, I don't like it, it's an objective moral. Yeah, there could be some subjectivity to it, or the application of objectivity could be flawed, but it would still be an objective moral. Morality is intersubjective, not objective. This one I hear quite a lot from the atheist skeptic community. So it's a descriptive statement that speaks of what people agree is right or wrong, good or bad, regardless of what is actually right or wrong or good or bad, and makes no real sense in regards to morality, because morality usually assumes at least two agents anyway. Law could technically be regarded as intersubjective in the sense that it too is an agreement of two plus conscious minds around the rules and the punishments, etc. However, one of those parties suddenly deciding, I don't agree with this law, therefore it is now legal, doesn't suddenly make it legal, does it? Legality of a particular thing in a society is above your opinion. In the same sense, just because a person doesn't agree with another one, that an action is immoral, it doesn't suddenly make it moral for that person to do it. So it's generally agreed that rape is immoral. If someone breaks the agreement and decides rape is moral, it doesn't make rape moral. They are still held to a standard above their personal opinion. Morality is treated objectively regardless. Some might claim that's an illusion of objectivity, but this seems more like a gambit of someone more desperate to hold on that their belief is morality is wholly subjective, rather than admit perhaps it's a bit more complex than that. It was once agreed that slavery was okay. Does that mean that it was actually moral to own slaves in that time? Or do we look back and realize that we were wrong to think that owning slaves was moral? Is there more to morality than agreement between 2+ parties? If a group of people agreed that torturing babies was okay, does that make it okay? If it's intersubjective, it does. Saying morality is intersubjective is essentially a subjectivity of the gaps statement, akin to the God of the gaps. So where someone seemingly wants morality to be subjective, they have to fit in some form of subjectivity anywhere, and therefore go, because it's there, it all is subjective. So there are subjective, intersubjective, objective, and even relative elements to morality, especially when you're speaking descriptively. But one bit being intersubjective doesn't make the whole thing subjective. So let me just quickly get back to the chat. There's been a few posts in there that I haven't got to. Dave, as I'm quickly scanning down, are there any that you think we need to address right now?
I've been trying to answer them as they go along.
So
the zombie example that Lord Brian brings up is kind of good. It's because it talks about how morals can change according to situation, where certain things that might not have been okay in a functioning society suddenly become necessary in a collapsed society.
Yeah, that's a good one, actually. And Josh says, as an anecdote, this is the conversation with us that brought him into the community. I think that's what happened whilst I was spending more time having conversations with you about morality and learning more about it and how it is more complex than I first thought it was. And then I started having that conversation with people online, trying to work out where the holes were in my own knowledge, and so that I could go back to Dave and go, give me an article that answers this question, or what do you think of that, or so on and so forth. And yeah, it turned into having a conversation with Josh that inspired a lot more conversations. It also brought Andy on board as well to our Fresh Air podcast, which was episode 3 of season 1, and he stayed with us since then. And I've had a number of great conversations with people about this topic. So it is encouraging to see all the different perspectives come in. And obviously, if there's anything that you do think that we're saying is wrong, don't be afraid to say so. Just please give us a decent statement. Don't just go, you're wrong, it's subjective. Tell us why you think it's subjective. Tell us why you think our statements about this are wrong. In fact, if you want to come on air with us, feel free. We're more than happy.
Yeah. I just love the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I think we love these sorts of conversations. You can even pick a topic, and if you want to come on air and discuss it with us, if it's something we're not too aware of, you might have to give us a week or two to read up on it. And when I say we, I mean Dave. So one of the common objections we actually hear about this is Hume's is-ought problem. So Hume was an emotivist, wasn't he, Dave?
He was.
Yeah.
And sort of a cultural relativist.
So I mean, he's one of your favorite philosophers, yet you disagree with him quite significantly on his take on morality.
Yeah. I mean, he's much smarter than me, so he's probably more right, but
So often people just present, what about Hume's is-ought problem? And you ask them, what about it exactly? And quite often, you don't get an answer. But when you do, it's something like this. So the is-ought problem is essentially saying you can't make A-B statements without any sort of middle. For example, it makes no sense to say it's sunny outside, therefore I should wear sunscreen, without the middle bit, and I do not want to get burned, or I do not want to get cancer. So what about this makes morality subjective? The is-ought problem tends to speak more of descriptive morality and shows a combination of objective and subjective statements rather than it being wholly one or another. The key part here is about values being subjective. In a normative sense, however, we could say that in any given circumstance, a rational person would probably have the same value as other rational people. So to lean on that sunscreen example again, I think any rational person would value not getting cancer. And we can apply that value to others who might not necessarily value it. So, for example, our kids, they will not have tasted their mortality yet. And so they might not care about wearing sunscreen. So we, in that sense, are going to be using our personal values that are often based on facts to hold people to standards above their opinion. So another way to think about it is cancer is bad. Health is good. What is a value? Well, something that adds benefit or has an inherent goodness to it. It doesn't matter if someone values their health or not. Good health is still of value and cancer is still bad. So whilst I do agree that the is-ought problem does add a degree of subjectivity to morality, especially in a descriptive sense, it does not make it subjective as a whole. It shows that it's not fully objective. Further to this, not all values are subjective. There are definitely objective values to morality, which I'll do my best to cover in the next few slides. And we're going to go into things like instrumental and intrinsic values. So I don't know if you've had the chance to read either Dave's Is Value Entirely Subjective or my On Value article on Answers in Reason, but this is going to go into that a little bit now. So firstly, we've got to understand what a value is, or something that is valued. So in short, it's something with positive benefits or properties of goodness. So there's a multitude of different types of value, but we'll focus on three in general, but we might gloss over a few of the others. There's preferential, instrumental, and intrinsic. Preference is obviously easy, it's what we prefer, and instrumental and intrinsic become a little bit more unclear, especially as there are things that have properties of both. So a simplistic way to describe the difference between those two is that intrinsic is something that is, and instrumental is something that does. Now, that's a gross oversimplification, but it's one that helped me get my head around it in the first place, so it's worth starting there with your thought process. So if we think about preferential value again, it's something that we simply prefer. The taste of chocolate over dung, the sound of a piano over a hacksaw, AMD over Intel. There can be, at least in some circumstances, objective reasons for this preference, but the preference itself is subjective. Instrumental value is something that you have the ability to do things with, or a means to an end. There can be preference to instruments too. For example, you might prefer having money over food, or vice versa. Both of those things are instrumental, but can have preferential value. Intrinsic value is something that has value in and of itself. It could be referred to as an end for simplicity. One thing to note, though, is there are no truly intrinsic values, as in values in a vacuum. But there are intrinsic properties to things that exist regardless of whether they're valued or not. All value is ultimately extrinsic, but some of those values come from intrinsic properties of an object and have the potential to add value. Therefore, it can be said that value exists regardless of if it's being valued. So think if we say intrinsic value, we're speaking of the properties that something has rather than something that would be valued in a vacuum with no life or any way for it to be valued. But equally, that object would have those properties there, even if there was no one to value it. I think with that, I mean, a decent example could probably be healthcare, couldn't it, Dave? So, for example, someone might value faith healing over medical science. But that doesn't mean that the medical science has no value to them. It just means that they don't value it.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that the faith healing is of value when trying to heal them of diseases. They value it and it gets value because of it, but it doesn't mean it has value when it comes to healing them. It all depends on how you look at value. I mean, there's arguments from people who argue that there are things with intrinsic value, like the Mona Lisa is a beautiful painting regardless of whether anybody finds it beautiful or not. And if you shove that into a vacuum, it would make the vacuum more beautiful, so therefore has intrinsic value.
But the argument there is because it can't, there's nothing there to value it, does it have that value? So I mean, that's splitting hairs over value. But whether you go with there's intrinsic properties, for example, the beauty of the Mona Lisa or the benefits of medical healthcare over faith healing, those properties do exist. It just depends on whether you regard value as something that actually has to have life there to value it or not.
Yeah, exactly.
So intrinsic and instrumental examples. So money, as I mentioned, has instrumental value. We use money as an instrument to get things that we value or prefer more than money. For example, cars, food, a house, etc. We are using the instrument to further our preference. Money also has value above personal opinion. We can't just decide £1 is worth £5,000. You could say that money giving us the ability to trade without carrying all our stock, big bags of grain, etc., is of value in and of itself. So that benefit would be there regardless of if it's valued or not. Therefore, that property is an intrinsic property. So you could say money is intrinsically valuable as well. So the other thing to note there is money's fiscal value is also intersubjective, which I will cover a little bit later. And obviously, some people prefer to just have lots of money over things. So it could be said that money has a preferential value too. So money has all of the types of the value that we've been discussing. Happiness is another value, though. It has value in and of itself. Now, siloed, you can't necessarily do anything with it. It's an end. It's just something that is good. It's an intrinsic positive property of being human, perhaps. So, of course, someone might prefer not to be happy, but that doesn't remove the value of happiness. Happiness, though, can actually be used instrumentally. It's a fact that a happy workforce is more productive. So it's instrumental in productivity. The instrumental use of happiness will eventually circle round through generating profits for the business, the shareholders, and and bonuses for the staff, and you'll end up with happiness as a final value as well. Survival is something that has value in and of itself. So even if it's not valued by someone, it's still beneficial to the species. Nutrition, energy, for example, food has instrumental value in achieving this. It is a fact that without food, we would die. We can't just, or at least nutrition anyway. You could be intravenously fed, I suppose, but we can't just decide we don't want to eat and still survive. So it's objective that we need the food. But when it comes to the taste of the food, this is purely subjective. So that's a preferential value. Of course, eating food you dislike does not remove its instrumental value. You can still survive eating food that you hate. So another way to put this, if truth about the universe is your goal, science has more value for finding truth than a religious text due to what exists intrinsically within science. So regardless of if you value science or not, those properties are there and the science has that intrinsic value, even if a society might prefer religion. So in conclusion, regardless of preferential, instrumental or intrinsic value, or something else, some would argue that my distinction of intrinsic properties means there are no intrinsic values, just different layers of instrumental and preference. We can at least see that there is a mixture of subjectivity and objectivity to value. So what have we got in the chat come in, Dave?
Not a lot. A good one from Lord Bryant, who says that the economic theory of subjective value is very similar to what we're discussing, and it is a great example.
Do you want to explain that one or save it for another time?
We can save it for another time,
Yeah.
but it's basically things get their value from how much they're wanted, which, preferential value. And the more something is wanted in a society and the rarer it is, the more valuable it becomes, that kind of thing.
In short, supply and demand.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair.
I mean, to put it very simply.
Yes, of course. I like oversimplifying these complex things.
I do. I'm a very oversimplified kind of brain.
I think that a bit of oversimplification can get you over that first hurdle of understanding something and then go, okay, so if that's basically what does it really mean?
Yeah, you have to understand the core idea in order to be able to start grasping more and more about a subject.
Exactly. And I think that's why you even saw me do it in the podcast quite often. I'd turn around and go, well, so does it mean this? And you go, oh, yeah, basically. And that was me going, right, that's me understanding the base level of what we're talking about. Hopefully that's helped the listener understand that. And now I can go back and listen to that bit again myself and have a better understanding.
Yeah.
So how do intrinsic and instrumental values relate to morality? So if we were to do it and we were to ask, are there intrinsic or objective values, or is it all just preference? So at the beginning, we discussed what morality is and its purpose. It's the principles of right and wrong, good and bad behavior to enable human flourishing through the means of a collaborative and cohesive society. So what's essential to human flourishing and survival? Being good to each other, fairness, equality, balance, help, healthcare. If we went around raping and killing each other, would we have a collaborative and cohesive society? Can we objectively say that rape is immoral regardless of someone's personal preference? Do we hold rapists to a standard above their opinion? All of these things seem to be a means to an end, so they are instrumental, but are also objectively good for the purpose of morality. Therefore, you can see there are clear instrumental values that definitely fit the purpose of morality that can both be subjective and objective. Someone disagreeing with those values means they're essentially disagreeing with what morality is. Equally, there are things with intrinsic properties that are values in and of themselves too. Happiness, well-being, equality, reducing harm and suffering, healthcare, and let's not forget flourishing and survival are values in and of themselves too, and they are part of the final value, morality. Disagreeing with what morality is and its values comes back to the whole descriptive versus normative issue, where normative is the conclusion all rational persons would make given the same information about the same situation. Even wildly different moral theories like divine command theory, which is very authoritarian, would still have had a benefit of flourishing and a collaborative and cohesive society if everyone stuck to it, regardless of the obvious moral issues that it has. Are some values subjective? Don't they change? Like with food being instrumental to our survival and therefore objectively valuable to it, we know what morality is and its purpose. So again, we can derive values that are objectively further that too. Things might change though, and therefore values could also change. For example, if we one day evolved into a life form that did not need food, it doesn't make it any less objective that we needed food, but it would mean that food has lost instrumental value, at least to us as a species. There would still be other species, I assume, that still needed food. However, if you decide to change what morality is and its purposes are, then you suffer two problems. On the one hand, you have a bit of a redefinition fallacy, and the other, it doesn't make the value subjective. We would still be able to see things that would objectively further the purpose. There would be things with intrinsic properties that can add value regardless of if they are valued. So if you decided to change the purpose of morality was, I don't know, eating cheese sandwiches, you can still make objective statements about the best way to eat cheese sandwiches. I know that's a bit of a ridiculous one, but it's what came to my head. So we can then consider the different moral theories. There are a number of different moral theories, and therefore they might have different intrinsic or instrumental values, but all have the same purpose. They're just trying to find the best way to represent this. So not all moral theories that I did look into have this as the purpose. I'd say most of them do, and it's largely just a couple of detractors that don't. If you're more interested in that, we cover that in Does Morality Have a Purpose on Answers in Reason. And if you have any comments on that and would like to come on air or anything like that, or just post them on our Twitter or YouTube or whatever, then feel free. So a change in values does not mean that they are subjective, unless we're talking about a change in preferences, of course. It could mean that we've realized that a particular value was wrong. Objective does not mean correct. I don't know how many times I've said that tonight. We should have a counter going every time I say that.
Drinking game.
We should actually make a philosophy bingo for all the common statements that we hear. Philosophy is dead. Drink. Citing Dillahunty. Drink. Rocks are atheists. Drink.
Alcohol poisoning.
So, in summary of value, when we speak of a value, we speak of its positive properties and ability to benefit us or something. So, whilst all value is given extrinsically, there are intrinsic properties within things that can benefit us, regardless on if we value it. Therefore, these things hold a form of intrinsic value. Even if you don't value your health, medicine, science, these things all have intrinsic properties that can benefit us. Similarly, with morality, if you don't value things like flourishing, survival, well-being, happiness, it doesn't stop these things from benefiting us as a society. Again, it seems that when we speak of value in morality, we often speak past each other, jumping between descriptive and normative statements. Well, what if person X doesn't value human survival and values raping babies? Is this what we would call a line of thinking that a rational person would have? If we agree that this is clearly someone who is not rational and potentially very ill, can we call it a normative statement? With that in mind, if we can make normative statements about morality, can we do the same with values? Someone might not value human flourishing, but does that remove its value? What about choosing a moral theory? Isn't that subjective? To an extent, yes. It would be like choosing a country to live in because you prefer their laws. The laws are still an objective standard, but they might not be a correct objective standard, for example. Although, do you choose to move that country based on the evidence or just go, I think I like that one? Consider a moral theory, which is an objective standard, like a hypothesis in science. Essentially, you test this hypothesis and see what works and what does not work. What gives us the best results for the overall good? From here, we can start to build our correct objective standard, and you can consider this like your scientific theory. Of course, with morality, it is much harder to test things, and we can't have that perfect experiment with lab conditions. Further to that, the conditions are constantly changing as we grow and evolve as a species. So whilst the purpose of morality remains fixed, the values that further this goal could change. So in summary of morality is not wholly subjective or objective. Descriptively, morality is clearly a combination of subjective, relative, and objective ideas and values. Whether you speak descriptively or normatively, it is clear that moral subjectivism and moral relativism are not correct, or at least that that's not actually how anyone applies morality, even if they say they do. So just to remind you there, moral subjectivism is the truth value comes from the person. There is no objective truth value, it's just the preference. And same with moral relativism, the truth value comes from the society. So again, there is no objective truth value, it's just what the society says is true. So in both instances, that would mean that we cannot hold the society or the person to a standard above their personal opinion. We would have to accept that what they do is moral. So if a society thinks it's moral to throw homosexuals off a building, or a person thinks it's moral to torture babies, it would mean those actions are moral and they cannot be held to a standard above their opinion. At least morality speaking, you could legally. Everyone seems to reject this notion and call out other people and societies for being immoral, therefore demonstrating that they do not view the aforementioned moral theories as true, even if they would argue there is a degree of subjectivity to morality. When we speak normatively and consider values that further the purpose of morality, we can clearly see that it's objective, even if one argues there might be a degree of subjectivity to it too. I mean, how many times do we see like a fellow atheist saying that the Bible God is immoral? Well, if morality is subjective, what they're saying is wrong, because it's that subjective statement. The truth value comes from personal opinion of your own actions. So,
Yeah. Another example is I am more moral than the God of the Bible. Well, if it's subjective or even relative, then there is no more moral than. That's an absurd statement to make, because there is no standard apart from the truth of the statement coming from whoever's making it or whatever culture is making it.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that it's a common contradiction that you see in the atheist skeptic community, where they will argue for this level of subjectivism and then contradict themselves, showing that they don't even treat morality subjective themselves.
Well, I've heard one argue morality is completely subjective. It's all based on personal opinion. But slavery was always wrong, and anybody who believes slavery was wrong was right was wrong.
I mean, that's basically one of the examples we used earlier, but it's crazy, isn't it? I don't think people fully understand. Don't get me wrong, I can understand that people thinking there's an degree of subjectivity to morality. There are some good arguments for subjective morality, but generally you don't hear these good arguments within the skeptic community. And they'll say, well, I'm a moral subjectivist, and you go, okay, so you believe this. No, that's not what I believe. well, then you're not adhering to what moral subjectivism is. Now, you could argue, well, okay, but this is how I see moral subjectivism. But then, okay, but that's not what moral subjectivism is. You're treating morality objective by telling other people's are wrong. Yeah, but it's only my opinion. Okay, but if moral subjectivism is true, the truth value comes from the person. So that means what they are doing is moral, regardless of what you think. Well, that's not what I think.
Yeah. I mean, I have to admit, a long time ago, before I actually started studying, I had some similar ideas. But once you actually start studying the subject and speaking to people who know the subject, you start to see things a little bit differently. And of course, changing your mind, that's an important part.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was quite stuck in what I thought was the subjectivity of morality, because I honestly hadn't looked into it too much. And the common argument was, if morality doesn't come from God, then morality is subjective. So my then response was, okay, morality is subjective then.
Yeah. I think a lot of the atheist arguments come from that. If objective duties exist, then God must exist. Objective duties exist, therefore God exists. Well, then to reject that, you have to argue that morality is subjective, or at least that's what a lot of people think. But you don't have to. You just have to show how they can be objective in a way other than God.
Exactly. I think we've done that a little bit. I hope we have.
Hopefully.
Was there anything left? No, that was it. We're done.
Nice one. Okay, we got through that quicker than I thought.
Yeah, well, we were going to have a couple of people with us, weren't we? Which was probably going to derail the conversation much further than we expected. But actually, it still took us about an hour and a half, though, Dave. Blimey.
Yeah.
Well, I do apologise for chatting so long.
No, that seems about right. There was a lot of slides there, so an hour and a half seems pretty good.
Yeah. So Lord Bryant says, I'm surprised they haven't blocked you all on Twitter. We're enemies. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Well, yeah, I have been blocked by Aaron Ra and Ken Ham. I was blocked by Ken Ham for correcting errors in his logic. I was blocked by Aaron Ra for correcting errors in his logic. It seems to me that fundamentalists don't like their logic being corrected. But I'm not wearing that as a badge of honor. I'd have much rather been able to talk to them and have a rational conversation. I tried a lot harder to be more rational with Ra and talk to him about various things. But he was just more interested in asserting his position over and over again and saying that he was right. Which, obviously, when someone's doing that, you don't really get far with a conversation at all.
No, and I find that with a lot of people that I have these kind of discussions.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I got called a theist troll and blocked because I was trying to explain epistemic justification to a fellow atheist. I've also been blocked by someone who I asked why he thought morality was subjective, because it was just because it's wholly subjective. Okay, but if it's wholly subjective, then that means that is that. Do you agree with it? Oh, whatever. Yeah, we get that a lot. It's one of the reasons I probably talk less and less online these days. And it's probably a good thing for my mental well-being anyway, and spending time with the family, because I do get wrapped up in conversations that don't go anywhere. I mean, I even got in a bit of a circular conversation that thankfully ended about truth. And my point of something that is true, regardless of whether we know it's true, it's true. Verification can help us know whether it's true or not. But if it's true regardless of whether we know it. It was as simple as that. But this went back into a circular conversation. No, you need verification so you know it's true. Okay, so you know it's true. So you're aware of the truth value being correct. I agree, but that doesn't change it being true. You know, if I say I am a man, I am a biological male, regardless of whether you verify this fact, doesn't change whether it's true or not. The truth value, as in whether it's true or false, will not change based on your verification. All that will change is your awareness of said truth.
Yeah, the truth maker comes from it describing some part of reality and it being the case.
Exactly. But you know, these are very, very common things that you get on the internet, and I think part of the problem as well is battleground mentality. You find people, especially on Twitter. I think Twitter's potentially one of the worst places for it because of your character limit. Find people so willing to jump and fight about every little thing, and they treat every little thing as, rather than, why do you think that? I want to understand your position. What about this? Have you thought about this? Have a discussion. They go, this is my position. I have to defend it. No, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. That's just my take on it.
Yeah. I mean, you can sort of put it down to there's a few different types of conversation that you can have or arguments. The first is an heuristic argument. I think that's what it's called, where it's an argument for the sake of argument. You're arguing to try and win, to try and defeat your opponent. Getting at a truth or anything like that isn't the main objective. It's to subdue your opponent. You can have a dialectic, which is what we try and do often, where we have a discussion about a proposition and we try to come to some kind of idea of what it is. You aim towards truth as the goal. Or you can have like a didactic conversation where you're just speaking to try and teach the person your point of view. And unfortunately, most atheists go for the heuristic.
Yeah. And I suppose you can sort of understand why, at least from the beginning. I mean, it's part of our tribal nature. We're all subjected to it. It's, I mean, think about school. It was about the music you listened to and the way you dressed and sports you played. You all got siloed into groups, and anyone not in that group was basically became a bit of an enemy. And groups had a habit of attacking other groups, and it's just the way things worked. It's not right, but that sort of goes into your later life. You see it with politics. Look at how polarized the left and right are. They argue so well, it's polemic, as I said, but you can even try and speak to someone who's very, very, very pro-gun. You might say, well, do you think that maybe they should do a background check? And they hear, I'm trying to take away your guns. And that's all they hear from the argument. You're not agreeing 100% that they have full rights to have guns. So therefore, you're the enemy. And I think that's what happens with a lot of communities on the internet. Not just atheists, not just theists, not just agnostics, not any particular group. I think we're all guilty of this tribalism, and if you're not saying what the groupthink says, therefore you must be the other one. That's why we get called theist trolls. We've had a question from Lord Bryant. It says, does it scare that lacktheists are using atheism for political purposes? As in, does it worry, maybe? Might be the better use. It doesn't worry me that they are. I think that, I mean, I understand why some folks are using the lacktheist definition, especially in political circles, because you're trying to increase numbers. I don't understand why they have to assert that you're an atheist when they go, okay, you're a form of non-theist. Let's go with the label you prefer. Would you be interested in our policies because they are dedicated towards non-theists rather than they are dedicated towards atheists? I can understand. I do think that there should be a separation of church and state in that sort of regard. I think that all of our decisions should be influenced by credible evidence towards things. But I do think religion has had a lot of benefit in the past, and I think it has built some great communities. And I don't think we should like religion gone like that. I think there are definite benefits to it. I just think that politically speaking, we should use rational and logical arguments that are evidence based. I don't think that we should necessarily use weak logic to further that end. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. I think there's good reason for political resistance to religious domination. I mean, if you think about how homosexuals were treated in Britain up until like the 60s, think of Alan Turing. That was because religion had its place in Britain. So having non-believers kind of combat that is a good thing. But using the lack-theist definition to try and group everybody together, it just, when you can just have non-theist, non-believer, that kind of thing, it just seems kind of pointless and tribal. Going back to the tribalism thing you mentioned earlier, there's experiments where in schools, the teacher would give half a class a red ribbon, half a class a blue ribbon. Wouldn't tell them why, wouldn't tell them they had to do anything, would just give them the ribbon. And then you would see them actually start to congregate with each other, start to have problems with the ones with the opposite color ribbon for no reason in particular, nothing said. And I think it's being done in that kind of way. Well, if you can get them all to accept this label, then they'll all join together, not for any particular rational reason, but just because they all feel like part of that group.
Yeah, that's a good one, actually. I suppose that's similar to houses. So at least in the UK, and this wasn't when I went to school in America, but in the UK you have different houses that you're in. So you have your year, for example, and each of you will be in different houses, and there'll be different colours. And so you've got your red house and whatever that name is, blue house, various colours. And looking back on it, you notice that tribe mentality. Oh, well, I wouldn't want to be in the red house. I like being in the blue house. And it builds that sort of thing. And then you have the competition that comes out of it. So you do sports things and you'll play rugby or football or whatever against the other houses. And then that builds more of a tribe mentality because they are then an actual foe. You are battling against this thing. You are rewarded for being the best house with the most points each term, etc. Trophies, etc. So yeah, I can understand how the ribbon thing would work, because there'd be a thing. Why didn't I get the blue one? Why have I got the? And then you tell yourself, well, it must be the best one because I've got it. And
Yeah,
not as good. And yeah, I mean, it is something about our psychology, and I suppose it does go back to how we evolved in the first sense. Anyone outside the tribe could be there to kill us, therefore anyone outside the tribe is bad. It became a survival instinct to reject people that weren't the same as us, where a lot of bigotry comes from. Lord Bryant says, I take a John Locke approach on toleration. Whether the person is Christian, pagan, or atheist, they are to be safe under liberty. For which reason urges this, the gospel commands it.
yeah, sounds good to me. I mean, you have to expect Locke to have those kind of Christian ideals, but he sort of goes over and above them sometimes as well.
Yeah. Is there anything else you think that we need to actually cover off tonight, or shall I let you go?
I was going to discuss about the corruption of moral language as described by Alistair McIntyre, but that might actually make for a more interesting standalone thing.
Okay, well, we can cover that. I also need to put in the event for Tuesday, which is Russell's World and Russell's Teapot. Not Tuesday, Thursday.
Thursday.
Yeah. So we'll be doing that one on Thursday. And then the week after that, I haven't got anything planned for it yet, but I'm hoping we can get Ben in for a bit of a different sort of discussion. I've also got an article that I'm willing to publish on the psychology of rejection. It ties into the tribalism thing that we were just talking about. As he's a psychotherapist, I've sort of forwarded it on to him so that it's a very small peer review, but I got Dave to read it and I got him to read it, and you've got your psychology degree and he's a psychotherapist, so I think maybe.
Yeah.
But hopefully he can come on and maybe have that discussion with us next week. But
I
any
mean,
ideas or that you want to go for as well?
yeah, if not, I can always come up with something, or if there's anything anybody wants us to discuss, that's fine as well.
Yeah, and we've got our list of things that we are going to chip away at, depending on the responses that we get at various social media outlets, etc. We do want to do a show that's entertaining for you and things that you want to learn about. But you know, if not, we'll just do what we want to do, like we usually do.
Yeah, we're rebels.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we enjoy the conversations, and even if it's only Dave and me talking and you're not there, we're still going to enjoy the time. But we love it when you guys interact. And on that note, thank you everybody who's joined us in the chat room as well and made the comments. It does make it so much better. If anyone does have anything that they want to come back on throughout the slideshow, any suggestions, improvements, contradictions, or anything like that, please feel free to put them in the comments on YouTube or contact us on Twitter or Facebook. We've got a debate group on Facebook called Answers in Reason, as well as the page. You can put comments on the actual web page. And if you really want, and you've got a strong objection and you want to come on board and go, I'd like to address this, please feel free. We'll send you a Discord link and you can come join us live on air. But other than that, I think that was pretty good.
That was fun. Yeah. And thank you, Lord Bryant. It was really great having you here.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah. Free philosophy classes right here. Yeah, thanks to Dave's degree, I get them too. Right, well, thank you very much. This has been Morality and Misconceptions. You've been listening to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi show. I'm Joe.
And I'm sort of Play-Doh.
Good night, all.
Good night.